So I'm honored again this evening to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Elizabeth S. Bolman, Professor and Chair of the Department of Art History and Art, Case Western Reserve University. She's also the academic advisor to our society. Professor Bolman got her academic start with her bachelor's degree in art history from Smith College in Massachusetts, followed by her MA and PhD degrees from Bryn Mawr in Pennsylvania. She's a leading expert on late antique, Byzantine, and early medieval Egyptian Christian art. Before coming to Cleveland, Elizabeth was professor and chair of art history at Temple University's Tyler School of Art, where she was a highly regarded educator, receiving the Great Teacher Award and the Lindback Award for Excellence in Teaching. In 2017, she became the L.C.B. Smith Professor in the Liberal Arts and Chair of the Department of Art History, Art and Art Education at Case Western Reserve University. She was charged with building the Keithley Institute for Art History in collaboration with the Cleveland Museum of Art, leading the joint program between CWRU and CMA. The College Art Association has recognized her expertise with its Heritage Preservation Award for distinction in scholarship and preservation. She is the recipient of fellowships and grants from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Fulbright Program, National Endowment for the Humanities, Dumbarton Oaks, the American Research Center in Egypt, and the now defunded, unfortunately, United States Agency for International Development, among others. Professor Bolman is best known for her work in Egypt, where she has demonstrated the vitality of Egyptian art, Christian Egyptian art, and presented new understandings of artistic production in the early Byzantine and medieval periods. In 2016, she published The Red Monastery Church, Beauty and Asceticism in Upper Egypt, the product of a decade-long project that she founded and directed. It included the cleaning and conservation of spectacular and unparalleled early Byzantine paintings at the Red Monastery Church. Taking things a step further, Professor Bolman, utilizing digital twin technology, collaborated with CWRU's Interactive Commons to create a digitally immersive HoloLens experience, and this allowed students to wear a headset and feel what it is like to be in that church and to experience the restored church. The conserved church has received a considerable amount of international attention. Among other subjects, it includes a monumental Secco painting of the Nursing Mother of God, which inspired Dr. Bolman to work on one of her current projects entitled Milk and Salvation, the Nursing Mother of God in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's a gender studies analysis of iconographic depictions of the Byzantine Galactotrophusa nursing Virgin Mary. Some of the personal highlights of her career including spending time at the monastery of St. Catherine at Mount Sinai. She has visited numerous times and is a trusted scholar there by the monastic community, which allows her access to icons from storage, and that's no small matter. The monks have also shared some of the newly conserved 6th century mosaic of the Transfiguration of Christ in the eastern apse of the church, then still obscured, awaiting its unveiling. She has always found the sense of history and sacredness there to be astonishingly powerful. And so, with the not-so-sudden realization that I am on the wrong end of this microphone, I am proud to invite Professor Elizabeth Bolman to the podium. Take it away. I'm sorry, I advanced it once. Okay, all right, thank you.
Can everyone hear me in the back? Okay, good. It's a nice microphone. I was very pleased to hear it earlier. You don't always get one. So I want to thank Dean for the invitation. I'm quite honored, Dean and the rest of the board, and I've been enormously impressed with his efficiency and planning abilities, and everything's just gone so smoothly, except when I sent him the PowerPoint this afternoon and I didn't attach the link. So we sorted that out, and I think we were all pretty calm about it at the time, which is just great. So the Hellenic Preservation Society has been engaged very generously with Byzantine studies in the United States ever since the first annual Byzantine Studies Conference, which was held here with the support of Hellenic Preservation Society in 1975. And this is an organization that has raised young scholars into being marvelous professional Byzantinists, and it's incredibly collaborative and friendly, and I think you all set the tone those many decades ago. And when I hosted the Byzantine Studies Conference here at both Case Western Reserve University and the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Hellenic Preservation Society once again stepped forward and helped support the event. So I feel right at home with all of you. I've been so happy all day thinking I was going to get to come join you. And I've been thinking a lot lately about a new direction in scholarship which draws on cognitive science, and I bet that's not what you expected me to say when I got up here. But I've learned very recently that people no longer think that there's a dichotomy between your mind and your body. They think that your brain is in your skull. Okay, that's not a surprise to me. But that your mind is your whole body, and you learn with your whole body. And what I want to try to bring you on today is a journey with your whole body and your spirit to the Monastery of St. Catherine and to pilgrimage there. And just for orientation, we're looking at the Monastery of St. Catherine, which is in the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula. So I'm inviting you tonight to embark on a pilgrimage with me, to embed yourself within biblical places and layers of time, rituals and emotions, travails and challenges, genealogies, etc., leading to salvation. To go on a pilgrimage, you don't actually have to physically go. What starts the whole thing is the intention. And the Byzantines understood that the intention was everything. So tonight, I hope you'll join me on a pilgrimage to the extraordinary Sinai Peninsula and the Monastery of St. Catherine. And I'm going to be reading the text that I have up on the screen. I'm not sure if it's big enough for everyone, so I hope that you'll read along with me or just listen. So we have evidence from textual sources that pilgrims' goals from at least the 4th century were to visit ancient Old Testament sites on Sinai involving Moses and the Israelites, as well as Elijah. To Christianize them with your presence, and I'm embracing you all here as pilgrims, reading from the relevant Old Testament passages and performing prayers and the Eucharist. The pinnacle of experiences on this pilgrimage are to go places where God has appeared to humans. One of these is the burning bush. Another is Mount Sinai, which is also called the Mountain of Moses. So in Arabic, it's Gebel Musa. And the Cave of Elijah, which is also on Mount Sinai, or the Mountain of Moses. The players tonight, aside from you, are prophets, pilgrims, ascetics, and these are the most important, mountain tribes, not always the good guys, and Justinian the Great, who did not himself go, but who is always remembered there for his extraordinary patronage. The earliest pilgrims' accounts that we have date to the late 4th century, and this very earliest one was written by an aristocratic woman. Her name was Egeria. She seems to have belonged to a convent, a monastery of nuns in Spain, and she had a fair amount of financial means because she traveled with support. And that's important, as we will see. Others involve an anonymous pilgrim from Piacenza in Italy in the 6th century, and a peculiar, passionate priest, Felix Fabri, in the 15th century, as well as others. So we'll be walking in the footsteps of Elijah, who, fleeing from Queen Jezebel, traveled for 40 days and nights from northern Israel to the Mountain of Moses, or Mount Sinai. This parallel established a connection, a typology, as we call it, between Elijah and Christ, who also spent 40 days and nights in the wilderness of a desert, this time the Judean desert. Within a Christian worldview, the Old Testament parallel proved that God's plan for salvation had existed from the beginning. And there are tons and tons of parallels. So there's Jonah, who lived in the body of the whale or the sea creature for 3 days and nights, and that's paralleled by Christ in the tomb. The places were rich in layers of sanctity from God, prophets, angels, ascetics, and you, pilgrims. In late antiquity, when people started going on pilgrimage, and up until probably the 20th century, there were no real roads in Sinai. So it was very easy to get lost. We're going to be considering emotions and feelings. Pilgrims from at least the 3rd and 4th centuries were prepared for pilgrimage ahead of time by hearing and reading the Old and New Testaments for their own personal encounters with holiness. Liturgical poetry trained them how to feel, how to respond to places where important events happened. And I'm sure all of your experiences in church have prepared you as well. Pilgrimage was both an individual journey and a collective emotional and physical experience. Pilgrimage to Sinai, however, was not for the faint of heart or for those physically less than very robust. Death on the journey. I did some extra reading in pilgrimage accounts to prepare for this lecture, and I was startled but not completely surprised. I was startled by the numbers, but not completely surprised to learn that people died on the journey. And if you look at those mountains, you can imagine why. Many complained of heat exhaustion and of the heat so bad that they felt that they were breathing fire, lack of water, dysentery from bad water, and attacks by tribal peoples who we now call Bedouin, who are working in collaboration with the monastery to make it run smoothly and to protect it in times of uncertainty. So they've gone from being the adversaries to being friends and supporters. But caravans had to leave people behind if they fell off their camels and couldn't get up. So for example, imagine that your water skin breaks, and that's it. You can't get any from anyone else because there's just enough to survive, and you eventually have heat exhaustion and you fall off and you can't get up because the caravans had to reach the next source of water. And in fact, they couldn't go all the way up to the source of water because the tribal peoples often surrounded them and made it impossible to approach them. Pilgrims reported the stench of dead bodies on the journey. So this means there were enough of them and that enough of them died that they hadn't all been desiccated by the time you yourselves came along. Jacob of Sarag, who lived in the 5th and 6th centuries, tells us of a 4th century ascetic who traveled to Sinai with other holy men. On their shoulders, they carried essential foodstuffs. I refer to bread and salt, not precisely what we enjoyed here tonight, bread and salt, as well as a wooden cup and a sponge tied with a string, so that if they ever found water in a deep down spot, they might soak it up with the sponge. The Piacenza pilgrim, writing around the 550s, spent 2.5 weeks on foot across the Sinai Peninsula with camels carrying water. We received 1 pint per person, once in the morning and once in the evening. When they met a friendly group of tribal peoples, these peoples offered them onions and radishes, which were an extraordinary delight after their weeks and weeks of too little water and probably very stale bread. Most of the guides who led people to Sinai, to the monastery of St. Catherine, were ascetic. They were monks. They were all men. They were monks or hermits. Living on Sinai involved extremes of heat and cold, very limited rainfall, and little arable land. So a local staple for camels were thorn bushes, I myself have been shocked to see camels chewing on thorn bushes to get at the water in the wood, and presumably the thorns, without having any discomfort whatsoever. So they talk about a strong stomach, wow. And at Sinai, place had a special gravity because of these appearances of God, because of these theophanies for Moses and Elijah. And there were a host of other places where biblical events happened, and people had charted these out and would share them with pilgrims. The layers of events and presences gave extreme weight to places. Locations, which gave special views of holy places, had alcoves within them which one could stand in to be directed to see the holy places. So the whole thing was set up for us to walk there and notice the most important sights. And I want to ask you what it would feel like to stand and walk where Moses and Elijah did. Does anyone want to share? All right, I'm not going to embarrass you. With my students, I would just stand here and smile for as long as it took, but okay. So this is the staircase, the path up the mountain to the top of the mountain where Moses spoke with God and received the Ten Commandments. And as you can see, it's very uneven. I myself have never been to the top of the mountain. I have back issues and knee issues, and I never wanted to push them. I surely would have, and I surely would have failed. But for me, the heart of it is the art and architecture, so I'm happy. Anyway, the burning bush was one of the key sites, the bush that burned and was not consumed, encountered by Moses, signaling the presence of God and holy ground. So this is where he was told to take off his sandals. Christian interpretations see it as a prefiguration of Christ in Mary's womb. The fire of Christ's divinity did not burn her. They also describe not only God, but Christ speaking from the bush. And Father Justin of Sinai tells us that this bush, this type of bush, is not usual on Sinai, that he knows of one other that's many kilometers away. So that certainly gives us all food for thought. From at least the 4th century, numerous ascetics lived near the burning bush in small caves. So you can see just above this green arrow, a hermitage that included several different places to stay and also small gardens. These ascetics collaborated on growing fruit trees and vegetables and celebrated the Eucharist in company with others. But for the most part, they lived in a solitary life as hermits. There's certainly snow in the winter and very, very few comforts. And if you imagine trying to get to Sinai, you'd be more concerned about taking water with you than you would be about taking, animal skins to keep you warm or something. So we could imagine these men suffering quite a lot for their faith and their desire to be there. Ascetics were and are the largest, most continuous, and most powerful presence on Sinai. 2 models developed, hermits and monks. So the models are called Eremitic and Cenobitic. So the hermits are solitary, and the Cenobitic monks are communal. They live in company with each other. And in the Monastery of St. Catherine on Mount Sinai now is a communal monastery. But most of these holy men started as solitary ascetics. Their goals in attempting to achieve salvation after death were overcoming sensory pleasures, engaging in, to quote Plato, which they did, a careful study of death, dying to the world in advance of their physical death. And as I said, first they were hermits. They organized into loose associations called lavras, where the group would get together on Sundays for the Eucharist, and they would share the responsibility of taking care of the gardens. Ultimately, both Cenobitic and Eremitic types of monastic life or asceticism coexist often. Moses and Elijah were understood to be prototypes of monks and ascetics. Hermits and monks modeled themselves on these Old Testament prophets. So what does that make the monks? How does it benefit the monks? It creates a genealogy where they are descended from Moses and Elijah. So they see a chain linking them to these Old Testament prophets because not of their human birth genealogies, but because of the practices of asceticism that monks engaged in to model themselves on Moses and Elijah. In the 6th century, when the Piacenza pilgrim and his companions reached the valley leading to the burning bush, the monastery, and the mountain of Moses, they saw a great number of monks and hermits who came out to meet us, carrying crosses and chanting psalms. They lay down on the ground and made obeisance to us, and we did likewise, weeping. I think we can all imagine, after the exhaustion of the journey, the dangers, the dead bodies on the side of the path, that we would weep with relief and also joy upon arriving at the burning bush and these other holy places. And also, laying down on the ground and making obeisance to us always reminds me of the admonition to treat everyone as you would treat Christ. So, seeing all of these pilgrims, all of you as Christ coming to greet them and sharing the joy and the sorrow. Now, there's some interesting contradictions that have long interested me that I've explored in my scholarship, and these are the cost of habitation and hospitality, on the one hand, and the goal of leaving the world behind while simultaneously managing it. There are numerous accounts of these hermits giving pilgrims fruit and vegetables from their gardens. Now, they must have had very little, and giving it to pilgrims must have meant that they deprived themselves of it. There's one account of up to 500 pilgrims at a time arriving at what was then the monastery, which we'll get to in just a moment. But there's also the challenge of water for everyone, and how do you deal with human waste? So I've always been impressed with these men who can juggle an intense spiritual life marked by deprivation and the attempt, at least, of ceaseless prayer, with an ability to offer hospitality and housing to numerous pilgrims, or to themselves when they organize into communal monasteries. So this is the valley, two views of the valley that the Piacenza pilgrim and his party came up and from where they lay on the ground when they were met with the ascetics holding crosses and palms and greeting them. So on the left, you see the monastery in the left foreground and the valley beyond. So they came up the opposite way. And this terrible image on the right is one I took directly into the sun, so that's why it's no good. But the monastery is up in those folds, and so this is from the direction that they approached. So we're exploring today layers of time. So Moses lived, people think, sometime between the 16th and 13th centuries BCE. Egeria lived in the 4th century CE, which corresponds to AD Anno Domini. And I think I'm actually going to read this whole thing because it's quite the passage. I was just going to read the highlighted bit. But we began the ascent of the mountains one by one. These mountains are ascended with infinite toil, for you cannot go up gently and by a spiral track, but you climb straight up the whole way as if up a wall, and you must come straight down each mountain until you reach the very foot of the middle one, which is specially called Sinai. By this way, then, at the bidding of Christ our God, and helped by the prayers of the holy men who accompanied us, we arrived at the 4th hour at the summit of Sinai, the holy mountain of God, where the law was given, that is, at the place where the glory of the Lord descended on the day when the mountain smoked. And I would invite you to consider our 21st century setting to be one more important layer in time. The monastery of St. Catherine at Mount Sinai was founded in about the middle of the 6th century. But as you know from hearing the first part of this talk, there were numerous men living in and around this valley where the burning bush is prior to the construction of the monastery itself. And in the photo on the left, you can just make out part of the monastery at the very base of the valley. So these etchings and other photographs of it often make the monastery look fairly small, but in fact it's very large in the context of enormous, unimaginably enormous mountains. And on the upper left is a view from the top of Mount Sinai, or the Mountain of Moses, where indeed one must feel as if one is on top of the world. A chapel was built there also in the mid-5th century. It has since fallen apart and a new one has been built. You see that in the lower right. There's also a very clear topography or geography of sanctity that ties places together. So, like yourselves, but perhaps even more so with daily attempts at ceaseless prayer and multiple celebrations of Christ and God, these men were steeped in the stories of the Old and New Testaments, and at this time people typically did not read them in order. So now when we get an Old Testament or a New Testament or both, we can look at them from beginning to end if we feel like it, and we have a sense that there's a clear order. But in this time, when texts were written down on animal skin, so vellum, calf skin, or goat skin, they were incredibly expensive and also bulky. And so you would read or listen to whatever someone happened to have, and you would also try to memorize as much as you could all the time, so that phrases would come to your mind and associations, you'd make associations across the different books as a very kind of natural way of thinking. The Holy Land and Sinai are full of mountains and also grottos, so very high up places and very low down places. So the Grotto of the Nativity is one example, the place of Christ's birth. But in this image from the 18th century, we're looking at an imagined series of mountains. The one in the center, more or less above the monastery, is where Moses spoke with God. The one on the right is where the body of St. Catherine was found, and we'll go into that in just a minute. The one on the far left is Golgotha in Jerusalem. And others were Mount Tabor, again we'll get into Mount Tabor shortly, and Mount Athos, because that was another very important center of monasticism on mountains. And these places were shaped by ascetics, so emperors and other aristocrats could make gifts to them, but the people who were making all the decisions on the ground all the time were holy men. An emperor's gift, Justinian the Great. He was petitioned by monks from Sinai to build them an enclosure wall. They probably also mentioned a church, but certainly Justinian was a great builder of churches, and so he built them massive enclosing walls for protection. He sent an entire garrison with their families to live there and help protect them. And he sent an architect to build a church with local materials, but he also sent along some extraordinary icons and also mosaic tesserae and extraordinary artists in the art of making mosaics. And we are so fortunate to have these surviving from the oldest continuously functioning Christian monastery in the world. That gives me chills just saying it, and I've known it for a very long time. So there you see Justinian's walls. They've been repaired here and there over the centuries, but they are largely still his walls. And you see a detail of one of his gifts of an icon of the Mother of God and Christ child. And the detail on the right is designed to give you a sense of the scale of what we're looking at. So at the very bottom along the white path there are people. They're very, very small. So you get the sense of how huge and massive the walls are. And you see a much later bell tower peeking up above the walls, and also a minaret for a mosque for visiting Muslims. What you also see in the detail slide better, below the bell tower is a kind of, looks like a wooden hut or something. And that's where they would draw up supplies and also people in baskets into the monastery when they had the main entrances closed and fortified. And actually 2 women from Oxford, Cambridge or Oxford, I think it's Cambridge actually, 2 sisters who were brilliant philologists, went to Sinai. They had funds and they were able to do this. They went to Sinai, and the monks loaned them manuscripts, and they would sit outside in the cold transcribing them. And so they're one of the reasons we have a lot of evidence of the library at Sinai, which I'll talk about in just a minute. This is an aerial view from one of the rooftops, and it shows you the church with its later lead roof, packed right in the middle, and that just gives you a sense of what it's like to be inside the walls. Everything is packed on different levels. You go up and down stairs. There's very little space to add anything at all. And this is the west facade of the church, and you see the powerful cross window at the top and the double window below that, both of which let light into the church. So if you go to the dawn service that starts at about 4:30, you can sit there in the dark and watch as the sun comes up and as that cross of light travels across the interior. And this is the entrance. You have to go down a steep staircase to get to the entrance on the right there. And here's a view that I took of the interior of the church that attests to centuries of prayers and gifts. So there are a lot of expensive Russian silver and gold lamps. The Tsars were great sponsors. You see that enormous iconostasis at the back there. It actually now blocks the view of the Justinianic mosaic that we'll be looking at shortly. And we can tell from this view that was made in the 19th century that the interior looks very, very much the same. Some of the details are misrepresented a little bit, but the basic atmosphere is pretty much identical. This is a view that Father Justin from the Monastery of St. Catherine on Mount Sinai took. He's a brilliant photographer on Easter weekend, showing the importance of the candles and the lamps. And this is a view I took to show what icons look like in partial light. And to this audience, I don't think I need to explain this too very much, or maybe not at all, but when museum audiences go and they see the extraordinary Cretan icon of the Virgin and Child, the Mother of God and Child, in the Cleveland Museum of Art, they see it evenly lit. So it shows, that's the impression they get of it, that's what reproductions look like. But actually when you're in a church from before dawn and you sit there, you realize that as the dim light starts to come in, the figures of the icons are silhouettes. They're black silhouettes, and around them the gold really radiates. And as the light changes, suddenly you start to see the painted figures coming to the fore. But there's a lot of movement in icons through the day and night. And that's, of course, in keeping with the belief that they connect you to the figures represented. On the left is a detail of the exterior of the east wall, showing the windows that are visible on the right. The windows aren't visible, but the light pouring into the church is visible. And these windows were very carefully placed. They illustrate the statement that Christ is the light of the world, and they help build a multisensory emotional experience through the history of salvation. The battery is running low, God help me. Okay. Okay, good. And going back to layers of time, I want to bring in here St. Catherine of Alexandria, because when the monastery was built by Justinian, it was dedicated to the Mother of God, the Virgin Mary. But St. Catherine of Alexandria was a martyr who was killed in the 4th century, and the tradition is that she was buried, her body was buried by angels on the mountain next to the mountain of Moses. And you see in this icon, the mountain of Moses is on the left with the burning bush there in the center, and St. Catherine's mountain is taller, which I think is interesting. I think in actual fact, Mount Sinai or the mountain of Moses is the tallest. But tradition has it that in the 9th century, her body was discovered on the top of this mountain, and she was brought into the church, and eventually she became so popular that the name of the monastery changed, and it's named after her. And today one can visit some of her relics. On the left you see a priest guarding the relics and the gifts that have been given to them, lots of jewelry. And in the upper box on the right you see a little bit of silver light. Those are tiny little silver rings that they give to pilgrims who come. They look silver, they're not actually silver, but Helen Evans, who was the mastermind behind the major Byzantine blockbuster exhibitions at the Met, was given a gold one by the monks. Now, I haven't rated that yet, but I have hopes. So we're looking along just in front of that enormous iconostasis, which you see on the left. And this was a group of Russian pilgrims who, based on the way they were dressed, had very little money, but clearly chose to spend what they had to come to Sinai. And on the right, in the lower box, you see St. Catherine's hand, and then you see part of her skull in the box on the right. And this is, for art historians, the most important part of the church. This shows the transfiguration of Christ when he and 3 of his disciples were on Mount Tabor, and he manifested himself as divine. And as he did that, Moses and Isaiah appeared to also attest to the vision and the divinity. And this is not a great view, but it's a much better one than you used to be able to find, and it shows the semi-dome of the Transfiguration below a higher wall that has other subjects on it. And this view was only made possible because about 12 or 13 years ago, an Italian team did an extraordinary job conserving these mosaics. People over time had attempted to, but by the time, I'm forgetting his name, the last name is Nardi anyway, Roberto Nardi, I think, he and his team got there. The tesserae were in many places not attached to the wall anymore. They were holding on by being attached to each other by little bits of plaster. So they were falling out from the wall as you would imagine a piece of fabric would if you pinned it, only in 3 or 4 places. So at the very last moment, it was elegantly and beautifully restored. The Italian team had a detailed record of every single tessera, every single glass or stone piece that's put into the plaster here, and they marked with each one what they did with it. So if it was a later repair, they took it out and they replaced it with tesserae that were made intentionally to look perfectly like the old ones, but there's an absolute record of every single tessera and what its status was and is post-conservation. So here we see things that might better remind us of the place where we are. Moses with the burning bush on the left, and then Moses receiving the law on the right. But as you know now, Moses was an early prototype for monks and ascetics, and Mount Tabor was another holy mountain in the imaginary geography of these men. And so we see Moses below again, and then also Elijah. In the middle between them, if you draw a line straight from the top down to the bottom, you see a cross on the top of the column there, and then you see the Lamb of God with a cross behind it, and a blue body halo behind that, and two angels, and then on the lower left, John the Baptist, on the lower right, the Virgin Mary in roundels. And here's a much better view of the top section of that. And imagine yourself in that church without the iconostasis, blocking your vision, seeing it in different times of light, and experiencing it on different days of the year, on the holy calendar. The Byzantines, when they made these masterful mosaics, they did not try to put all the pieces flat. They intentionally put them at different angles so that they would light up differently depending on the time of day and the light on them. So they would constantly give you a sense of movement and reflected light. And then here's the masterful transfiguration with Christ shooting out divine rays with the most basic of ground lines and otherwise a completely gold background representing divinity. And along the top are the 12 apostles in roundels. On the bottom are important prophets. King David is in the center below Christ, that roundel, and he is believed to be a portrait of Justinian as David, or David as Justinian, or however you want to think about that. And then two men who were alive and who participated in making all this happen are shown at the corners, and instead of having gold halos behind them, they have square halos, which are actually rectangular, but they're called square, to show that they were alive when the work was created. And I've heard one person say that ever since that beautiful iconostasis was set up, I believe it's from Crete, that none of the monks from Sinai have become saints because they can't see the transfiguration while they're praying and meditate on it. Here you see light coming in through the window into the sanctuary. Light, as I said earlier, is a very important part of the whole experience. And this is the most famous of the icons believed to have been given by the Emperor Justinian to the monastery. So those of you who are not art historians or passionate about icons may not know that almost no icons exist from the early centuries of Christianity. This one is dated to the 6th century. It's believed to have been made in Constantinople and traveled to Sinai as part of Justinian's gift. And the reason that so few have survived is because of iconoclasm, when the church decided that figural images were not correct. And so a lot of fabulous early icon works of art that are also icons, they're first and foremost icons, were destroyed. But Sinai at that time was under the control of the Muslims, and so they were not required to destroy their early icons. So they have the best collection, not only of early icons, but a continuous tradition of icons through the centuries up to the present. And this particular one is staggering in its power and its authority. Notice, if you will, not only that your first impression is that Christ is looking straight at you, but if you look at the two eyes, they're going in different directions. And so what that does is it gives you the sense that Christ is looking at you while he's simultaneously looking at the rest of creation. And it creates a very profound reaction in person, and I certainly hope in this slide. And anyone who wants a copy of this slideshow, by the way, I'm very happy to share it. I see some of you taking pictures, so you can get a better picture from the slideshow. Almost 20 years ago, after the monastery had first loaned a group of icons to a museum ever, that was because Helen Evans, who I mentioned earlier, had gone and talked to the monks and sat with them and drank tea with them and stayed in the women's guest house that had one towel for everybody and didn't complain about a thing. She's intrepid. I'm a bit of a baby compared to her, but she persuaded the monks to trust her with some of their icons, and that they were in the first of the major Byzantine shows at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And she was also instrumental in helping raise funds and organize displays for the most precious icons in the sacristy. So when I first went to the Monastery of St. Catherine, the icons were just informally stacked on shelves around the church, or a few of them were put in glass cases that you couldn't see in the narthex because it was too dark. And when I first walked into this sacristy and saw this beautiful and safe display of the icons, I burst into tears. I was so moved. The icons, most of them are figural icons that show the Virgin Mary and Christ child, or the adult Christ, or various saints standing in, singly or in small groups, or as we saw with the one of St. Catherine, sitting. But this one is very famous. It illustrates the heavenly ladder of John Climacus, and what he describes are the, excuse me, the steps that you need to take to achieve salvation. And you can see devils pulling ascetics down and tossing them into the mouth of hell. And to a modern audience, or at least to me when I first saw these, I thought they were funny in a way. But if you really think about everything that the monks were going through and about the stakes of the whole thing, it's not funny at all. It's very sobering. So I'm going to say a few words about the St. Catherine Foundation. It was founded in 1995. There are 3 boards, one in New York, one in London, and one in Geneva. I'm a trustee on the New York board. And their royal patron, formerly Prince, now King Charles III, they decided to do a lot of things to help the monastery. And the most important of all was that they moved the kitchen from underneath the library. And I haven't even talked to you about the library, but you can just imagine. So I always love them for that. That's what the old library looked like on the left. This is what it looks like on the right, with funding and also the instrumental work of Dimitri Dondos in making physical things happen in Egypt, which is not easy, as I know from personal experience. So on the right, everything is safely enclosed in, I guess, closets or display cases for the manuscripts. They're all organized. The fire system is not water, it's some kind of a heavy gas that gets rid of fire, so that if there ever is a fire, the water doesn't damage all of the manuscripts. It's extremely well thought out. This is an example of one of their manuscripts without illuminations. Many of them have wonderful illuminations, but this one is very dear to me because it's my very good friend Derek Kruger, who's a Byzantine religious historian, who's using it in the Monastery of St. Catherine when we went there. And it gives you a sense of the age of these manuscripts. And so you can see from Derek's hands that he's being allowed to use, to look at the manuscript without wearing gloves. I think in museums and major libraries around the world that would not be the case. But they have taken care of the manuscript by putting it on foam so that it's not fully open, it's just partially open so it doesn't damage the spine. And I hope you can see all the dirt around the edges, which comes from the centuries and centuries of monks using the manuscript. That's another layer of time and layer of human deposit that in a way beautifully attests to the importance of these manuscripts. The St. Catherine Foundation is in the process of making protective, individually sized boxes for manuscripts. So these boxes are to protect the manuscripts. They are bespoke, so each one has a different dimension. They have a support that keeps any vibration from coming through from the ground to the manuscripts. They're protected in acid-free boxes, as you see on the far right, and then they're enclosed. And these can still be purchased if you want to buy one and dedicate it to someone. The cost used to be about $1,200 per box. As I said, they're custom made, and they are contributing to the next 1,000 and more than 500 years of the manuscript's lives. And get in touch with me if you want to. Dean very kindly put the St. Catherine Foundation link for donations on the website. So we're looking again at the map. You can see Cairo, St. Catherine's, and then Sharm el-Sheikh. Well, why am I including Sharm el-Sheikh? Because the easiest way now to get to the monastery and drink more than 2 pints of water a day is to fly to either Cairo or directly to Sharm el-Sheikh and drive up to the monastery from there. So sometimes you can arrange for the monks to send a car for you. Other times you can have a tourist company arrange a car to take you to the monastery. It takes about 2.5 hours on pretty nice roads now. So it's a much easier pilgrimage in the flesh than it used to be. But I'm not going to ignore the fact that traveling abroad is often exhausting, and not all aspects of the monastery by a long shot are wheelchair accessible. So you would still need to face some challenges. But this is what one of the resorts at Sharm el-Sheikh looks like. Now we get into something a little disturbing. You want to look at the resort again? Yeah. Who owns the monastery? So the current state of Egypt has a law, and has had for a long time, that anything over 100 years that's an antiquity of any kind belongs to the government. Now, they don't enforce this a lot, but it has been on the books. And the monks for many, many centuries have been diplomatically handling the challenges of ownership and access. And so they used to have a document like the one we see on the left that was, they say, given to the monastery from the Prophet Muhammad, who used to visit and talk to the monks. And this is actually not uncommon. Many monasteries have stories of Muslim intellectuals coming and talking to the monks. And the Ottomans took the original, but they had a copy, and that's what we see on the left. And on the right is translation of it, Prophet Muhammad's Charter of Privileges to Christians. Lately, so the last many centuries, the monastery has been under the control of the Greek Orthodox Church, and they've been doing a fantastic job of preserving it and running it. And I didn't say earlier, but should have, that the library at the Monastery of St. Catherine, like their icon collection, is a continuous library over 15, 16, 1700 years, and it is mentioned in relationship to the Vatican Library as far as its importance goes. So the Vatican Library has more books, but they don't have the same continuous record of books in probably 15 languages. And Father Justin, who I've mentioned several times, a friend of mine, has been for years working on digitization projects with high-end and, once again, specially made equipment to scan the manuscripts for posterity. So the Egyptian court, as many of you may have heard, recently ruled that Egypt owned the monastery. And they have a new plan which is incredibly offensive to me, at least, which is called the Transfiguration of Sinai. So if it's a play on words, the Transfiguration of Christ, but it is designed to turn the monastery and the land around it into a massive tourist destination to make money for Egyptians. I have nothing against Egyptians making money. I love the people of Egypt, but this is outrageously detrimental to the monastery and the land around it. So in the right, you see the smaller circle, St. Catherine's Monastery, and then this big circle on the left is a new complex, and I'm gonna just zoom in and show you a little bit more of it, this huge outside stadium or theater, and then pools and, pools and ponds and swimming pools are definitely, Sinai is the antithesis of a place where you should be able to find that kind of thing, right? So the Egyptians are changing the ownership, according to them. They're changing the climate, they're changing the lightscapes, the soundscapes, the quiet that the monks have always had, at least at night. And they're destroying the peace of the monastery. So that's a very sad ending to this, but I would like to invite you again to join a chain of prophets, saints, pilgrims, with layers of memory, of events, of emotions, and of sanctity. I hope you've enjoyed this pilgrimage today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Yes?
How many monks reside there?
I don't actually know the answer to that. It's not a huge number. It's probably about 50. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, and Dean has very kindly put a link, not just to the St. Catherine Foundation, but one to a Friends of St. Catherine that raises money for the monks. And so the monks actually, especially with the tourism declining for global reasons, they've been facing some financial challenges in running the monastery, and they typically get a lot of their money from tourists buying books and postcards, et cetera, in their shops, and now they're not getting that very much. And so any donations that you want to give, not just to the foundation, but directly to the monks, and that's personally what I feel most strongly about right now, is available on the website. And Dean also very kindly put a link to funding for an excavation on Samothrace, the Greek island of Samothrace, that is being partially run by my esteemed colleague, Professor Maggie Popkin, who's been involved in the excavation for about 15 years. And so she typically sends students or brings them herself. So if anyone has archaeology near and dear to their heart, please feel free to contribute to that. I hope to be able to send out a brochure for everyone to read more about the Samothrace project. And while I'm making pitches for things, I'm going to make a pitch for something that is not for me, but is for the future of my department at Case Western Reserve University. When I retire, and I have no plans to retire anytime very soon, I can promise you that, but when I retire, I am confident that I will not be replaced by a Byzantinist. So if anyone in the audience or anyone you know is particularly dedicated to preserving the legacy of the Byzantine Greek tradition, endowing a professorship would be the only way to ensure that such a position were renewed for the study of Byzantine art and architecture. Okay, that was not, I didn't mean to go off on that long tangent. That was not an answer to a question. Happy to answer other questions. Yes?
I appreciate how you invited us to feel the research. And I'm inferring that your virtual reality project that Dean introduced you with is part of that. Could you say something about the ways that you are bringing the whole back?
Sure, absolutely, and that's a wonderful question. Thank you. So I directed a wall painting conservation project in Upper Egypt at a place called the Red Monastery, and the interior was covered with thick layers of soot and didn't look like anything much, and now it's recognized as among the handful of most important monuments from late antiquity or early Byzantium. And the very last thing I had done on site, because it's in a living monastery, which means you turn it back over to the monks after you have the privilege of working there for many years. So we turned it back to the monks, but immediately prior to doing that, I had it laser scanned, which in 2013, I think, which involves collecting millions of data points that record location and texture and color. I mean, just billions of them. And my extraordinary colleagues at Case Western Reserve's Interactive Commons, when I met them, said they thought they could do something with it, which I was very excited about. And in fact, they had to invent a whole system to eliminate a lot of those billions of data points and pare it down so that you experience it to scale when you walk into the HoloLens, the extended reality, but the data that goes from your headset to a computer isn't slowed down by too much information. So they found that perfect sweet spot, and you walk in and you are in perfect proportion to the monument in front of you. So you feel it, you see it. My students watch a lecture that I gave on the monastery. They read parts of my book. And when they walk into the HoloLens experience, they say that they had no idea what it was like. Many of these exceptional monuments are designed to be experienced through movement. And the Red Monastery Church has a sanctuary that is shaped and planned like a 3-leaf clover. So it's called a triconch monument. It has 3 semicircular apses and 3 semidomes with paintings on them. And the only way to experience it is by turning around and looking at how things relate to each other in person to scale. And the brilliant man, Mark Griswold, who is the faculty director of the Interactive Commons, he takes on challenges like you're giving him some candy to eat or something. So during COVID, I was meeting with him and his team on Zoom. So there's all these faces, on the screen. You all know that all too well, I'm sure. And I said to him, Mark, do you think we could levitate? And the faces of all of his colleagues just went, like, no. And Mark looked excited and said, well, let's figure that out. And they did, they figured it out. So you can now levitate to the first level, the second level, all the way up to the clear story. And when you look over like this, you can see the floor way, way below you. So you get to see the benefit of the environment that you would be able to see now without scaffolding in it, free of scaffolding, and you also have the benefit of climbing scaffolding that doesn't exist and doesn't obscure you from seeing things. So it's a double. Yeah, and then the first group of students, we spent about 5 classes in the headset with the Red Monastery, and when it was the end of the last class and it was time to go, they said they didn't want to leave, which was very moving. And then they said that they wanted to create a ritual for themselves. And so we descended to the ground floor, and they decided to play the Coptic liturgy and walk around in a circle, and whenever they felt complete, they could leave the simulation and take off the headset. But it really underscored, as you were saying, the embodied aspect of the experience, because you don't have that kind of experience looking at pictures, even of 3D kinds of things. When you're actually in it and you move around it as you would if it were there in person, or you were there in person, it just changes everything. It's the future of higher education, it's the future of sharing cultural heritage with other people, and it's happening right now at Case Western Reserve, and I'm very, very proud and grateful to be part of it. Okay, well, thank you all so much. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks, Gene.
Thank you. That was fantastic. So thank you again for that. I think there's still coffee and there's still some dessert. We have a silent auction going on. And that concludes our formal program. I think next year's, we'll stick with May, a kind weather month for next year's annual general meeting. And perhaps it'll take place at St. Constantine and Helen, but I have to reserve the date. Anyway, thank you all. Again, have some more coffee, look around, please look at some of the stuff. And we're all honored to be together with you tonight, and thank you for coming. But again, have some more coffee and hang out for a while. All right.